Hi guys, welcome back to Tech Diversity, where we teach, inform, and inspire new tech talents to be able to break into the IT industry and build successful careers. Today I'll be sitting down with a friend of mine, Jackie Loureiro. Jackie and I actually met when we were both enrolled for the same user experience design immersive bootcamp here in Washington, D.C. And she's going to walk us through how she was able to first break into the IT industry and build a successful career as a senior product designer. If you are interested in more content like this, please make sure you subscribe and let's get started.
So my name is Jackie Loureiro. I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland, outside of DC. My parents immigrated here from Brazil, so I was first generation. I spoke Portuguese as my first language. I attended from first grade through 12th grade an all-girls private Catholic school. So, yeah, that's kind of unique. Private Catholic. Beyond that, my childhood, my parents were divorced. My mom actually worked in tech. She recently retired as well. So she was in the 80s as a boomer, a computer science major, and worked in IT for the Brazilian government in DC. So,
Wow.
yeah, and her sister as well. So I actually come from a tech family. My dad works for the government. He's not as interesting. And then my older sister as well, she's the one who is how I kind of learned about what UX was. So when I was in high school, college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Like when people would ask you like, oh, what do you want to do with your life? Or what do you want to major in? I was super undecided. I was like, I would change my mind every week about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I didn't know what I wanted to major in. So I started at the University of Maryland as general studies or whatever it was called, because I just had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I ended up taking a year off of college and transferring to James Madison University, where I declared a major in psychology. So again, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I was after 2 years of college, you kind of have to pick something. So I think I maybe didn't officially pick until like I absolutely had to, but I ended up majoring in psychology. And the reason for that was not because I knew what I wanted to do outside of school. It was just because I was like, I have to pick something. I might as well pick something that I'm interested in. But I really had no interest in like getting a PhD in psychology, a doctor of psychology, or like I just knew I didn't really want to do like a lot of school. I didn't want to like do that, but I was like, I may as well just like be taking classes in something that interests me. And what's interesting about that is that it's super applicable to UX. I use it all the time. And, people in the industry will comment on that constantly. Like, oh, you're a psych major, like my manager is taking a psychology course right now as part of like UX advanced learning. It's actually ended up being a really good fit. In terms of like design and that kind of background, as a child growing up, I was always super artistic and I always really liked drawing, and I took art classes when I was young and stuff. And that kind of just faded out in high school. I think just because my parents were, again, they were immigrants. They were like, you need to get a good job. You need to get into a good college. Like you need to get good grades. Like that was super important. And art wasn't something that they saw as being useful for those things, getting into a good school. So I didn't really like pursue it beyond middle school, even though it was something that I kind of was like naturally good at and like had some interest in. The conversation did start again. So when my older sister, who was 5 years older than me, she ended up getting a master's in commerce. So again, nothing related to tech, but she ended up working in tech. She's the one who told me about UX and that it was like a thing. And she was really pushing me to major in graphic design. There were no majors for UX. When I was in high school, I don't even think the job existed. It might have been like some capacity, but like not really. It wasn't like something that existed. So I ended up all those times people asked me, what do you want to be? And I didn't know. What I ended up being or becoming was something that what didn't even exist. So I really don't like that question. When you, especially like people ask like young kids sometimes, like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's like the jobs are going to be different by the time. Don't even know it. So she became a product manager, but she started with a master's of commerce, with a master's degree, ended up working at a tech company in customer service. So she was a 2008 she graduated at like the worst time for the economy. She had a master's degree and was working in customer service. And I remember that being like a big thing. We paid for this master's degree and now you're working in customer service. But the customer service role was at a tech company. It was at a startup called Wedding Wire. You might have heard of it.
Wedding Wire. It sounds familiar,
so
yeah.
It was bought by the Knot, actually. So it's like it's like a place where you can like search for wedding vendors and stuff. But it became pretty big. If you've planned a wedding, you've probably heard of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it ended up growing and blowing up and stuff. And she was like one of the first people there working in customer service, but she was able to transition to product management. And when she was a product manager, she was working with UX designers. And she was like, Jackie,
this is for you.
This
is for you.
My stubborn, like 18, 19, 20-year-old self was like, don't tell me what to do. I don't want to be told what to do. And when it came to majoring in graphic design, it was something I considered, but I really didn't want to take 4-hour-long art classes. And again, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was just like, I'm just going to do psychology. So that's what I did. It was my senior year of college when I started kind of worrying more about my career stuff. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to be one of those people who gets a job out of college because I have a psychology undergraduate degree, which is not that useful. Like in the psychology world, you're expected to get like a master's or a PhD.
Or go for your PhD, yeah.
So I was kind of in this situation where it was like, oh, what do I do? What do I want to do? And I had no internships either. I was a pool lifeguard. That was my job every summer. And then, okay, I probably need like an internship of some kind. And my sister, because she works in tech, all of her network was in tech. She set me up at like this other startup with her friend. And that was my first job in tech. And I actually started this internship as a business development intern at this startup in DC. Yeah, so I was working at this startup called VMed, and I immediately took an interest in the design side of things. I was like, oh, even like sitting over there with the designers with their MacBooks versus everyone in sales and business with their like Dell computers. Like they had just more fun, creative, like they had like little stuffed animals around and like little Pikachus and stuff. And I was like, these people, like I am like, because it's like creative and like colorful and it's fun, and I'm a creative person. I always have been. So I immediately gravitated towards that, and I ended up working with the UX designer there, or a couple of UX designers there, but mainly under like one specific one. And she was the one who taught me like how to do like Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator, and taught me like what a prototype was, all of these things. And I was designing like just like infographics. If I have to have like an office job or something, I think like this is what I would do, because it was a startup. Again, it had like a ping pong table. I was like, okay, I can see myself being in this world. It doesn't look like this scary gray cubicle type of situation. It just felt right. And again, I started as a business development intern, but they basically just told me, they were like, you should change that to like UX and graphic design intern, because that's what you did the whole time you were here.
So I'm going to interrupt you a little bit here. So in college, you ended up doing psychology because you having to choose a major, and that is something that interested you. As a kid, you've always been creative. You are a good artist. I have seen some of your work and I'm like, whoa, Jackie, did you actually draw that? Did you do that? So you already have a creative side to you. And then you have your sister who's actually in the tech industry. Your parents are in the tech industry. So it seems like you had some sort of guidance coming into UX. So I was going to ask, making that shift, like how hard was it for you to make that shift? It seems like in the internship, you were able to do UX UI before we met in boot camp.
Yeah, I had an internship in UX. So the shift probably would have been easier had I stayed in DC because I had an internship at this company and that company was interested in me. Do you need a job when you graduate? They said that to me and I was like, no, I'm moving to California. So I'm I don't know if you've noticed, I don't listen to people and I'm very like on my own, independent minded. So I had decided in my just kind of personal life, not career decision, that I wanted to move to California when I graduated college. And nothing was going to stand in my way. And no one telling me that you should establish your career before you do that was going to stand in my way. So that made the transition harder because I was in a place where I had no network. I had no family. I had no anyone. So if I had just had that internship and stayed in DC, I don't know that I would have needed to do. But that internship in California in a really competitive market of Los Angeles was just not enough. It was like, you've had a 3-month summer internship in this industry. I had some scrappy portfolio, and the job that I ended up getting in LA was in the entertainment industry, and they liked that I had some design experience. So I was basically like redesigning a lot of like marketing decks and sales decks and things like that. But I was working a lot in like Excel and doing a lot of things that I really wasn't interested in at all. Okay, I am in a situation where I don't like my job. I no longer have a car. I got into a fight with my roommates and was losing my apartment. So that's when I decided I'm going to put all of my stuff into a storage unit and I'm going to move back to DC for 3 months and do design. I know that that's the only part of this job that I like is when I get to design things, and I want to go back to doing that UX thing that I was doing. So how can I do that? I had tried like applying to jobs. I tried like looking at I just didn't know what to do. I didn't really have a job searching skill set. The job that I ended up getting in LA was through a friend who worked there. The job searching skill set was a big thing that I was lacking. I had like a little bit of experience, but I also didn't have a lot of experience. Like I learned so much. That boot camp was really helpful. And that's where I really learned like a foundation in different prototyping tools. And I think we learned Sketch. I use Figma now, but we learned Sketch back then. And prototyping and usability testing and user research and like just so many things like journey mapping, like all these things I didn't have words for. I didn't know what they were. Also just understanding the UX process from end to end. I ended up becoming an end-to-end UX designer. So that end-to-end process was really helpful. Some people like just do UI or just do wireframing or just do user research, whereas I have through testing. I do all of it. So, and that's also where I learned a lot of the job searching skills that I really needed. Again, I was still only a year out of college. I had no network. So learning how to really properly use LinkedIn and learning how to network and to set boundaries and learn how to define what you wanted in the job space and like go after that. Now that you've kind of like acquired these entry level skills.
I think you had one of the most interesting paths because a lot of people, when they're trying to break into tech, they don't have that kind of guidance when it comes to first having internship and you get to see a creative side of tech and you're like, this is exactly what I want to do because I already have a creative background. And then again, your sister, who does have a lot of information, it seems like was guiding you throughout your journey coming or breaking into the tech industry. So now you moved to California, moved back to DC. You did have some experience. We ended up meeting when we were doing the user experience immersive course. That was an intense 3 months. I remember it was a very intense journey for all of us. But I wanted to hear a little bit more about your experience going through that 3-month course. What did you think? How did you feel? What were the emotions that you were going while you were going through that course?
Yeah. So I was embracing for it to be really hard and for me to just not see the light of day for 3 months and to just like work and but it ended up being a lot more fun than that. I was like because we were in a classroom where we all met each other and got really close and everyone's going through the same things and we're kind of batting ideas off of each other. And again, UX and tech in general is a lot more progressive, a lot more creative, it's just not this traditional workspace of like gray Excel numbers, like driven. It's like, oh, let's get some sticky notes and stand up and like put things on the wall. And like, it's this very like, hands-on collaborative environment. So it ended up being a lot more fun. And then also just meeting people was the best part of it for me. I'm still in contact with so many of you, even being across the country. I'm based in San Diego now, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. So it was really fun, but it was also a lot of work. I mean, but it was something I was interested in. It was something that I liked learning about. So that made it feel less like work at times. But then there were times when I really would like hit pits and be like, I'm really struggling with this. I remember like the first project was a little bit easy for me because I had done a prototype before in my internship. I had like some exposure to this. So I think compared to everyone else, I was a little bit like more confident. And then I remember trying to like learn Principle and trying to like for some of the later projects, I had peaks and I had pits, you know what I mean? And I think we all did. Like there were moments where you felt like, hey, I just learned something new and like that feels really good. And then there were moments where it was like, I'm really overwhelmed and
I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I also had like no presentation skills. Well, I had learned presentation skills like in college and stuff. Like I had taken like a class on it. So I guess I didn't have no presentation skills, but I was not a strong presenter. I still don't think I'm a strong presenter, but we had to present a lot and I get really nervous. And that was something that followed me when I started interviewing for jobs. I get nervous and it was something I had to like really overcome. And we can talk a little bit about that when we get there. It was a really good experience overall. And I recommend it all the time to people because I enjoyed it and it set me up with that foundation that I felt like was necessary for me to start.
So knowing a little bit more about your background, this tells me exactly why you're a perfect fit for user experience design. And this is why you have been able to move on up. You're currently a senior product designer for a creative space. Not a lot of us are working in a creative space. I'm working for the federal government, right? So it's a whole different ball game. But before I get there, you did mention that you recommend UX design to a lot of people. In your opinion, what are some of the critical skills that you think people should have to come into the UX space?
So I do recommend UX a lot. I also recommend tech in general a lot. And the nice thing about tech, I'll start with tech, is that you can do anything in tech. You can be a salesperson in tech. You can do marketing in tech. You can do product management in tech. So depending on your skill set, you can find something that fits for you in the tech industry. And the tech industry is just so desirable because it is high wages. It is more progressive. You do get a lot of PTO. It's very focused on work-life balance, which I think is so important and also just makes the company so much more efficient. So just tech in the beginning, I recommend all the time. UX, I also love, obviously. UX is an umbrella. There are a couple different tracks you can take within UX as well. So you can be solely a UX researcher, which some people like to take that path. And that is something that I recommend to people who are fascinated by the idea of designing for an app or designing for a website, but maybe don't have a lot of like creative artistic ability. And research also does require, I mean, it is research. So if you've done that in any capacity, I know in psychology, there's a big research component, like science research. If you've done that in any capacity, that's what it is. So you also have some affinity for that because that's what you're going to be doing. And that can be in terms of survey writing, interviewing, data collecting, working with the data analyst really closely, and interpreting that data and passing that on to a UX designer or UI designer, depending on your company structure. So that's something I would recommend more to people who maybe have like a sciencey background and maybe aren't as creative. UI is another path you can take. You can be solely a UI designer, which is similar to like a visual designer, someone who really focuses on just the aesthetics. And that is my favorite part. I love
So is
UI.
mine. Yeah.
It's like fun and like that. I really think having some sort of natural eye for things, you don't have to be like the best artist in the world or be like really into art or like artistic, but you have to have like an eye for things. You have to like be sort of, and you kind of know if you do or if you don't, you know, and that's something I feel like can't be taught. I feel like people are either kind of born having like an eye for things, or they go through life not being able to like put an outfit together. And my sisters are like this. So I just know my fiance is also like this. He can't match things. He can't, you know, he just doesn't know. So if you don't have those abilities at all, I would not recommend UI. Then there are people who are just strictly UX and just do wireframing, and that's kind of a good in the middle, which is, you know, you don't need to play around with colors and fonts and have that kind of like eye for things, but you don't necessarily have to like be like really into like science and research either. But it is still creative in the sense that you are designing, like building, like architecturing
Yep.
products or features. You know yourself the best, and like whether you're more math oriented or science oriented or art oriented. I always describe UX, at least the entire umbrella. Again, I'm end to end, so is very like left and right brained. People who are both analytical, logical, and also artistic, creative are the people who are set up for this job.
Perfect.
And it's like, if you're that person, if that resonates with you, not only is this like a perfect fit, it's also not going to be that challenging. Getting into the industry, super challenging.
Yeah.
Breaking into the industry, getting your foot in the door, establishing your portfolio, that's challenging. But like the actual role for you is going to come naturally if your brain is like that. It's just going to be like, yeah, this makes sense to me. This is just how my brain already works. Yeah, it's really going to be a perfect fit. Having a college background and like was helpful for just knowing how to write well. But not every UX designer has to be a good writer. That's something I used to say a lot, was like, you need to be a good writer to be a UX designer. Now I work at a company, it's much bigger, and there's a lot of different UX designers, and we all kind of have different like strengths and weaknesses. Like I work with one guy who's so organized in his Figma files, and I'm like more organized, but I'm just like naturally not. And so it's okay to not be, you know, a perfect 10 at everything, but you want to have the majority of these skills. And I think that analytical plus creative brain is ideal. It's key.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And you did mention earlier that you do recommend tech in general. A lot of people think of tech as this black and white type of career where you just go in, you either become a web developer of some sort, and that's the only focus that a lot of people have. But there is so much that you can do in tech, like you said.
So much.
Where is the disconnect for a lot of people when they think of tech? They automatically assume there is only a narrow path that you can take.
So this is one of the notes I had to talk about. There's a difference between a tech company and a tech role. And you can work at a tech company without working in a tech role. You can work at a tech role without working at a tech company. And you can work in a tech role at a tech company. And all three of those things have different pros and cons. So working at a tech company means you're working at a company whose product is a technology product. Typically they started as a startup, and they're, you know, started in, you know, late 90s, 2000s. I mean, late 90s is even pushing it. It kicked off in the 2000s is when these tech companies exist. There's obviously the big tech companies that we call them FANG companies, even though Facebook is now Meta. It's Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google.
All these big companies, yeah.
Those are the FANG tech companies. There's also a lot of different types of tech companies. So again, there's the FANG tech companies. Those are the biggest tech companies. Those are the ones that pay very well, but you're going to be working with a lot of people. Your job is going to be very focused.
Yeah.
You're going to be working on like that little button in the corner. Like you're not going to like touch a lot of things, and it's not going to be like that. Then there are what I like to call established tech companies. An established tech company is a company that started as a startup but is now profitable. This is a sweet spot, I think, because it's a company that's like maybe 500 plus people, but it can be smaller too, depending. It just depends. But a company that is profitable but started as a startup, these companies tend to be hard to get a job at because they're very picky. But they pay well. They have amazing benefits. They still have that culture of a startup, so they're still very like kind of creative, collaborative, progressive in the way that they work. It's very like, non-traditional, non-conservative kind of mentality. And this would be like Headspace is an example. And then we have startups, and startups are companies that are tech companies that are not yet profitable. So they are still relying on investors, whether that be from angel investors or self-funding. They're still relying on investors and they're not yet profitable. These companies are super fun to work at. They're very collaborative. You wear a lot of different hats. You're very stimulated. I like to think of this as like the ADHD company. It's easier to get a job at these companies, which is one of the perks. So this is how I got my start, is starting in startups. The cons of startups is they are not always stable. So the risk of losing your job is real. They also don't pay as well as the other two, typically. Sometimes they do though, because sometimes they have like insane funding. But the job security is not always great. Depending on the type of startup, you might be working more. But then I've also worked at startups where it was like really chill. So those are the pros and cons there. Lower barrier to entry, maybe not as good pay. Usually really good benefits though, because they're very, when I say benefits, I mean like PTO. So those are all tech companies, and startups a lot of times, sometimes don't have like healthcare and 401k. Don't always have that. But I think just because of my own experience, that's how I got started. I think they're really good for entry level people just to get your foot in the door and get some experience and build that portfolio. So those are tech companies. And then we have tech roles. A tech role means a product manager, a web developer is what people typically think of, the coding. But there's so many roles that have nothing to do with coding, which includes a product manager, a data analyst, a UX designer, a UI designer sometimes, a content manager. And under web development too, there's like front end, back end, full stack developers, data analysts, product managers, UX, UI designers are kind of like the main tech roles. And then like managers of that. So like a design manager, development manager, but those are typically seen at bigger companies also. So those are tech roles. And you can be in a tech role, you can be a UX designer and work at a bank or work in government or work like in a non-tech company, in a non-tech environment. And you're not going to get as many of those tech company benefits as you see at tech companies, like the unlimited PTO, high 401k match. Unlimited PTO is really the big one, right? And like summer Fridays, some of them are experimenting even with 4-day work weeks. My brother-in-law, who also works in tech, works at Dropbox, and he has like therapy budget, pet insurance, like just crazy, like all these things. He gets like an allowance on top of his salary to like use for wellness. Like, so things like that, those are gonna be at tech companies. And then the nice thing about tech company is you can be a finance manager at a tech company. You can be a marketing manager at a tech company. You can be a sales rep at a tech company and get the tech benefits, but have nothing to do with tech in any capacity.
So it definitely kind of outlines that there is a lot of opportunity to be able to break in tech, whether you end up working for a company that specifically does tech, or like you said, you could work in a bank and you might end up doing something that deals with tech. But back to your experience after the UXDI bootcamp, what was your interview process like? What were the first few years of trying to place a job as a user experience designer? What was that like?
Well, I was super scared and nervous for this because I was going back to California and I was like ready to just. And the scary thing is everybody kind of launches and you're suddenly unemployed because you gave up your job and where you were, which is a big risk and a big leap of faith. And now you're unemployed. You have no paycheck coming in, and that's really scary. And for some people, for most people, I think we still had to pay rent or, do whatever. And I was moving back to California, unemployed. It's really hard to get an apartment in California, first of all, if you don't have a job. They won't even rent to you. So I was staying on an air mattress at a friend's house for a month when I moved back. They said to apply to like 10 jobs a week. And back then when most of tech, I think, is remote now. I don't even consider a role that's not remote. I live in San Diego. There's no tech here. Like, well, there actually is a growing tech industry in San Diego, but compared to LA, it's like nothing. So, but back then, you had to consider where you were, right? Like you couldn't apply to jobs in Chicago. Like you had to, and there weren't 10 new jobs, entry-level jobs that were in your radius. Like there weren't 10 new ones a week. Like I would apply to all of them. And you would just run out of jobs to apply to. And it was scary. And I ended up landing. I got really savvy with like searching for jobs. LinkedIn has like the best jobs. But like Indeed has more jobs for entry level people. Even just Googling UX role, you might find, you might get like, jobs that are listed on like their website, but aren't listed on job boards.
Yeah.
Those will have less competition because they're not as like findable. So Googling jobs, that's how I got my first startup job. Just really getting savvy with like searching and blasting out my application. And at my first year, I think it was my whole first year, I had 6 jobs in a year. I was bouncing around from startups that were failing. And so the first startup I worked at for like a month and quickly realized that they were not going to pay me. So then I jumped to another startup that I met. I was working at the like lowest bottom of the barrel startups that were failing left and right, bouncing around from them because I just needed a job and experience and a paycheck, and like it didn't matter at that point. I just needed something. So then the second startup I was working at, it was a mobile app. It also failed. And then I started contracting for this like health and fitness. So I had at this point 3 startups, which sounds crazy, but also my portfolio I have mobile app experience. I have a health and fitness industry that was a TV. So I had TV experience and I had like web experience. I had all this like different experience in all these different industries. So the more of these startups that I'm racking up, the more diverse the more experience I have. And startups are cool because you get experience creating like style guides and you get experience. If you have any interest in ever creating a startup, working at one, I highly recommend because you will see what works and what doesn't. Then I ended up getting a job through my neighbor at his company. So they're building just like a Tesla kind of car. And I was like, I don't think that's going to have my role. You work at a car company. And sure enough, they were hiring a contract role for UX. So I was like, wow, that's so randomly specific. I was working on their mobile app, Tesla. If you've ever used a Tesla, I didn't know about any of this before I worked in this company. They have an app that works as like a key and you can like start the car remotely. You can like start the like air conditioning remotely. So I was working on the app for the car. And then also touching a little bit on like the screen that was like living in the car of just like design for that. That one was a 3-month contract that ended. And then I got a job at the first non-startup. Then I was like, here we are. I spent a year bouncing around in startups, building my portfolio, getting experience, messaging people like crazy. This is one of the keys that I did. This is one of the points I wanted to talk about too, what networking is.
Yep.
Because when they talked about networking, I was like, oh, this is like this scary thing where you go to networking events and you like dress up and you have your business card and you like hand it to people and like shake hands. Yeah, and that is not that can be what networking is. That's a form of networking, but like networking does not have to be that intimidating. Networking is literally everybody you know that you're close with, your friends, your siblings, your cousins, you reach out to them first and you say, hey, I'm interested. I just finished this boot camp, or I have a little bit of experience, or I'm interested in this role, this industry. Do you know anyone who works there? And they'll be like, you know what? I think my cousin's husband does. Great. Can you set me up with them? Can you like set me up with their email? Can you do like an email introduction? And like, that's how you get started, is just literally talking to whoever, and then really using LinkedIn is your best friend. I had no shame on LinkedIn. I was messaging people. It was like, oh, hey, we went to camp together in 5th grade. You work at this company that is hiring, and I just applied there. Do you have like can you link me up with the recruiter, whatever? And anytime I applied to any job, I would just scroll through the people at that company.
The connections, yeah.
And I would, not even the connections, just people that I was not connected with, the people who worked, and I would look for like UX designer or senior UX designer or anyone who I would be working with. And I'd be like, hey, I'm like a entry-level UX designer, and I saw that you're hiring. And I still do this as a senior level. This has never not worked for me. I saw that you're hiring, or I saw this company. Hi, I'm interested in learning more about the role. Can you point me to who would be best to talk to about this? Or like, could you tell me more about the role? And most of the time they won't respond because a lot of people don't check LinkedIn. But when they do respond and they connect you with the hiring manager for the role or whatever it is, that's how you get interviews.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can also I was applying through online and stuff, but those LinkedIn messages and really like being like, oh, hey, like we were, like anyone you know that you've ever known, you went to high school with them, you can message them. Like, it's okay. Like, and anyone who is job search has been in that position and knows like where you're coming from. So like people message me all the time and I'm like, yeah, let me look up the like hiring manager and like I'll like do an intro. Like I have no problem doing that because I was in those shoes, and it doesn't matter who it is if I have any connections with them or not. I like completely understand where they're coming from. So like just don't have shame. And the worst that's going to happen is someone does think it's
say no.
Yeah, they're gonna say no. They're not gonna respond, or they're gonna think you're weird for 1 second and never remember you again. Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, or best case scenario, you get a job at a company you're really excited to work with.
So you're really not going to lose anything by having to reach out and ask to network, like you said. And even for me, if it was not for the people in my circle, like I said, there were computer engineers who had their masters in software engineering, electrical engineering. They were all in IT fields. If it wasn't for them, I don't think I would have shifted into the tech industry. That's a really good point that you mentioned. LinkedIn, networking, and starting from the people that are within your circle. It doesn't have to be intimidating to network. And let's go back and talk about your interviewing process. What was that like? What tips do you have for anyone who's new into the IT industry, whether it's UX or not? Let's talk about UX. What tips do you have, and how was that experience for you?
So, like I said a little while ago, interviewing was something I had to overcome. And the best advice, if you're someone who gets nervous in interviews, the best advice I have, or that I got and that I have stuck with, is get them talking first. That meaning the first thing that should come out of your mouth is, tell me more. So tell me more about this role and this company. And now they're talking. And now the conversation has started, and you're not just like sitting there waiting to be asked a question, like, and like overthinking it and like letting yourself get psyched out. Now the conversation has already started and you're hearing about the company and the role. So you're already thinking of questions naturally. It's already starting. So getting that out of the way, just in general, my biggest interview tip for people who get nervous. But the interview process for tech, again, can look different depending on, now I've interviewed at all of those aforementioned places. So there's established tech companies, there's like kind of the big tech FANG companies, but also big tech is also like Dropbox. It's not just the FANG companies. just like really big tech companies. And then there's startups. The hardest interview processes that I have found have been the middle tier, the like established tech companies. Big tech is actually like, they're so well oiled, you know what I mean? Like that they have usually 3 interviews. They have the phone interview, the interview with the portfolio walkthrough. They all have a portfolio walkthrough. And typically what you want to do when you do a portfolio walkthrough, even though you just spent all this time creating your portfolio and making it perfect and making these stories easy to read and you can walk through them, you still want to make a deck with at least, or 2 decks with like 1 to 2 projects is what they say. I think usually 2 projects, and depending, but you might even want to do more projects just because like depending on where you're applying and like what they are looking for. If they're a mobile app, you might want to show 2 mobile projects. If they're mobile and web, you might want to show a web and a mobile. But there's like the portfolio walkthrough, and then there's like the meet the team, like the panel interview, where like a lot of people who you'll be working with will like ask you like really specific questions. The phone interview is usually with the recruiter, and that one's pretty easy. You just kind of get like an overview of the company, and they'll like ask you, are you authorized to work in the US? And they'll ask you about your background as well and stuff, and just kind of make sure they're just like the first barrier, just to make sure that you're like at least qualified from the get-go, like you have enough years of experience or whatever just to even work at this company. And they're like the first phase. That's the easiest interview. Then it's not always in the same order, but a lot of times it is. There's like kind of a set structure. Then you're walking through projects. And that's just going to be practice. Like once you make the deck, and you just need to get comfortable presenting and talking about your projects, and the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And like once you've done a couple of interviews too, the later ones, you do the work in the beginning, and then you use that work the whole time you're interviewing. So it only gets easier. And then the panel interview is when they like ask you more targeted questions. But again, typically in the tech industry, it's not like, because it is a kind of like a more progressive industry and stuff, I don't find that I'm being asked like trick questions like, what are your biggest weaknesses and whatever, because they're not trying to test you to see like, oh, how do you handle that's not the job. The job is, can you do this or not?
Yeah.
And do you know what you're talking about or not? And like, do you know how to use these software programs or not? Are you like, does your portfolio look like the type of designer that we want or not? They're really just trying to get to the bottom of it. They're not trying to like trick you, which is nice because I would not handle that well. The mid-sized tech companies that are like established and profitable, those I found are the hardest ones, and they usually have 5 interviews, and it's like phone interview, there's a portfolio walkthrough. Oh, those are the ones that have the design challenges. That's what it is. They'll give you a design, and again, big companies that are too big, they don't have time
for that. Yeah.
Like they're not going to give you one. But the design challenges are often, I usually don't struggle with them. Actually, they're usually like, okay, design a solution for this, and if you are a UX designer, you're gonna know how to do that. Like it's not, if anything, it's just more nerve-wracking than like it actually is. Just like trust that you know what you're doing, trust yourself, just do what you know how to do and what you've been taught to do and what you have the skills that you know you already have, and like you'll be able to do a design challenge. It's more just them seeing how you work and how you process things and how you explain things. And design challenges, sometimes they're take home. They like send it to you and you do it on your own time, and then you like send it in. Sometimes they watch you. Those are a little more intimidating. Yeah. Like you'll do it like on Miro or Figma, like mirror your computer. Or back in the day, it was, you were interviewing in person and you would do it like on a whiteboard. So those ones usually have design challenges, and then they have the panel interview, and then they have the final interview with like the head of design or whatever at their company structure is like the head person. So those are the hardest ones. And then startups, a lot of times it was like 1 or 2 interviews, 3 or less. Those are the easiest. Those are the easier ones because they can't really afford the people who have all this experience and stuff. So they're just looking for someone, can you do this and will you do it for what we're paying you?
Yep.
So before you interview, think of questions to ask. The more you do this, the more this will come naturally to you, and you'll actually have questions. Like once you have experience, like you'll be like, okay, I want to know like what's the team setup? Like how many people are in a team? Do you work in sprints? Like is the role end to end, or is the role like part who am I working with? Like what are the meeting structure? Like you want to like those are genuine questions you have because you want to know what it's going to be like working there, and then you want to know like, oh, okay. So like do you start with a stand-up meeting? Once you have any amount of experience like that will like the questions will come so easily.
So it also sounds like when you get into these interviews, a lot of people, when we were also trying to break into tech and are just getting interviews for the first time, you're a wreck. Like you're nervous. You're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what they're going to ask me. But the biggest trick here is that as much as they're interviewing you, you're also interviewing them. You also want to know about their company. And I think a lot of people are scared thinking this is like an interrogation. It is not. It is almost like, I think treating it like a conversation really helps. I think the biggest thing for me was that. And I think I'm hearing the same thing from you. But also, if you end up failing the first few interviews, a lot of people get discouraged when they don't get those jobs in the first few interviews. I don't expect to get those jobs in the first few interviews. For me, it's actually a learning opportunity. What are your thoughts when it comes to having to do more interviews, and then you kind of start to see the pattern as you go with these different industries?
I completely agree that every interview is just practice. So even if you don't get that job, like there's always the next one. I also noticed that a lot of times the better jobs come later. Like when you send out all your applications and stuff, like the ones that take longer to respond, a lot of times are like the better jobs. So it kind of almost like works out. Like the first few, like maybe didn't work out. I also always try to remind myself too that like if they didn't like you, it probably wasn't a good fit. You probably wouldn't have liked them. Like if they, were too hard on something that maybe you struggled with, they're probably just not a good fit. Because like if you were to work there and you struggled with that and they were going to be hard on you for it, it just really probably wasn't a good fit. So just remembering that also, that this is a two-way street, like, and you don't want to just chase the jobs that like have the shiny name, or like you really want to like figure out what it is you want, and if that's high salary, or if that's work-life balance, or if that's working on a specific, like working on mobile versus web, or if that, and like really like set your boundaries and like know what you want. But yeah, absolutely, it is a conversation, it's a two-way street. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and they're just people. They're just we're all just people who watch Netflix and order pizza. You know what I mean? Like they're not like some god from above that is like, they are just a person too. And a lot of times the people interviewing you are also nervous. I get nervous interviewing people.
Yeah. They're just people just like you are. Like you said, know your worth. As much as you want them to hire you, go in believing and understanding you're also an asset to the company. And I think having that self-confidence in yourself is also going to make that interviewing process a lot easier. But currently you work as a senior product designer. What does a day in Jackie's life look like?
Yeah, so it's been good so far. It's the first company I've worked at that I would consider a big company. Again, I started at startups, which are typically small, and then I was working at like a mid-sized company. So I was a little intimidated at first because so I've been there a little over a year. I started like last August, so I'm still kind of on the new end. I was a little bit intimidated because I was like, I'm used to working on small teams. I'm used to just like knowing everyone I work with. And now it's like, sometimes I'll work with like different people every time. And it's weird, but it's still structured. I think one nice thing that the tech company, so they, the way a lot of these companies have structured it is so that like you're in pods. And I heard this in a lot of interviews. A lot of companies do this and they call them pods. So that even though you're at a big company, they shrink it down for you. So like my pod only deals with, I actually got moved halfway through the year. I was, before I was in like a different area, and now I'm in e-commerce. So that's like what my like pod deals with, is the e-commerce side of things. But yeah, so a typical day, I kind of structure my day around what my meetings are. So my day will change depending on the project that I'm on. So because again, it's a big company, like it really a new project has a new product manager, a new product owner, like new like leadership, and like I'm working with different people. So like that will really change the cadence and the rhythm of like my day to day. So I'll just explain like right now what my day to day is. Right now I have a really good PM, which is great. I love a good PM. She's very like on top of things, and she makes my deadlines like very clear, and she pretty much every day I have a meeting for the project that I'm working on right now. So I will kind of structure my day based on that meeting. So if that's in, I also work across time zones. I'm in the Pacific time zone, and we have a lot of people in New York. We have a lot of people in Calgary in Canada, which is the central time zone, or the mountain time zone. So sometimes I have like early meetings, like, and I have to like wake up and like do a meeting. I'll like structure my work around there. But yeah, I'll wake up, I'll do my morning meeting, and then I will get on Slack again because we're in different time zones. Sometimes I have like things to catch up on. I'll then open up Figma and I'll see if there's any comments. We really work with like Figma comments a lot, so I'll see if there's any comments from anyone else, any of the other designers or the copywriter or anything, and I'll like try to address those comments. And then I'll usually be aware of like when the next time I have to show designs is. So if that's like on Friday, then I know I have like, if it's Monday, I have 4 days to finish these designs because that's when they need to be shown. Yeah. So I'll like structure my days according to that as well. I'll be honest, like, again, I work in tech and I'm a senior product designer. So I've done the startup grinding thing, and now like I have a lot of work-life balance.
It sounds like you have a pretty balanced day. So I want to go back to all of the hustle that you had to do in order to get here. A lot of people are intimidated. Breaking into tech is hard. We're not saying it's easy. You just get in and you'll get the job. That's not really the reality. But for you, even having to go through all of these different startups, having to wear different hats, having to learn so many things, and now you're here as a senior product designer, is it worth it for someone who's looking to break into tech, but they're intimidated and they're also afraid of the amount of work or the different things that they have to learn to get there? Was it worth it for you?
It's the most worth it thing ever. It's like so a lot of, I talk to people and people know what I do, and people like that I interact with on a daily basis like know kind of my day to day, and they're like, okay, what job do you have and like how do I get it? Like they'll immediately ask. They'll be like, I'm just like confused like how you're making the money that you're making, and you're living in Southern California, and like how you have this like lifestyle and this work-life balance, and how you're taking so many vacations a year. And I say, yeah, so I do UX. I work in the tech industry. This is what I had to do. I had a boot camp. I had to work at 6 different jobs in a year. I had to be unemployed and message 1,000 people on LinkedIn, apply to 200 jobs, do 5 different interviews, set up a portfolio, do all of it. And then as soon as I finished telling them everything I had to do, they're suddenly not interested anymore. And I'm like,
yeah,
then yes, I worked hard, but I worked hard for like a year or two before I was coasting. Like,
yeah.
So I'm like, a year or two for like, think about like doctors have to, how many years of school they have to do, like getting a master's degree, like what that requires, like the beginning of any career is going to be a little bit tough.
Yeah.
And the benefits of tech are so great. And I will say, like, even though those first 2 years were the hardest, they were also kind of the most fun. And most fulfilling, because I was working in startups that are super creative, super collaborative, super like, I got to work on a lot of branding. I got to work on like a lot of like really creative different things. So even though I was working more hours and working, worse jobs and had like worse benefits and whatever, my job was more fulfilling. Like now it's like very like, okay, do the design, that it's simple. Like now I have enough experience that like it comes easily to me, you know?
Yeah.
I just kind of do it, I bang it out, I'm done. I move on with my day. I make dinner. I do meetings. I've presented my work 1,000 times at this point. So if I have a meeting where I have to present, I present the work. I take the notes. It's so like at this point,
Repetition. Yeah.
yeah, and I it's so worth it. It was so worth it, and I mean, I do genuinely think like that there are right and wrong reasons to get into this industry. The wrong reasons being, I just want the work-life balance and the salaries. I want to be a UX designer too. Okay, you want the work-life balance and the salaries? There are so many jobs in tech. Which one is the best fit for you?
For you.
Same thing, same like type of lifestyle, but like do what you in tech that you actually feel like you're a good fit for. And yet breaking into the industry is hard, and the job searching process is hell, but like it's temporary. It's temporary. Once you're over it, and like every round it gets easier because every round you're more senior level, you have more experience. So that first job searching period though, like that first like trying to land and trying to get like your first like stable job, it's hard and it's a grind, and it's a lot of ups and downs, and but it also was the most like creative part of the career for me. Like I even like working on my portfolio, like again, like if you don't like designing, don't become a designer. So for me, like, working my portfolio, as stressful as it is, it's also a little bit fun. Like like it's something I genuinely enjoy doing, is like coming up with designs for things and making things pretty and making things like look no.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think going back to, I think every path you take in life is not going to be easy unless things are handed to you. And there are people who spend all of their life working for something that is so minimal. If there is a hard path to take, it is one that doesn't change, specifically for me. For a lot of people, they might be comfortable with what they're doing, but you rather suffer for the first few years to relax for the next journey in your life. And I think that is the part where people are like hesitant, whether they want to go for it or not, because they want to take the easy path. It's not going to be easy the first few years, like you said, but it's going to be the path that you should be on, because it gets a lot easier later on. I think we're getting to the last parts of this interview.
Okay.
Tell me what inspires you the most. What are some of the things that motivate you or inspire you the most as you go through your day to day?
When I get like a project where I can really be disruptive. So a lot of projects, especially at big companies, you're just trying to stay consistent with the current design kind of thing. And there a lot of times you get small projects that are just like, okay, we just need to like add this like button here, whatever. When I get a project where it's like, I want you to redesign this page and I want you to go crazy, that is like, I just had one of those and it was so much fun. And not only was it fun, it actually made a huge impact in the business. We already have a 27% increase in purchasing activity on the pricing page that I redesigned. And it's like, that's so cool. And I like got to do everything from like background images to like just I redesigned a whole page that's visited a lot. So
wow,
that was super cool, because usually you're designing like a section of a page and just like the buttons under the photo or like whatever, and those are like these like I don't like those are fine, you bang those out pretty quickly. And but when you get I definitely get more inspired when it's like something that's actually going to make like it's like a problem that I've like noticed on the product, and it's like, yes, I finally get to like do that, because I've been like using the web, because when you work at a company, you use the website, you use the app, and you're like, you run into the problem, and you're like, oh man, I cannot wait till we get to like get rid of this page, or like I cannot wait until we get to like we fix this problem. But a lot of times you don't, as a designer, you don't really decide. Like the product managers and the product owners and like those people are the ones who like decide what we're going to work on next, and the stakeholders. Those are the people who like decide like what's the most important and what's the most valuable to the business right now. So a lot of times you'll like have that like thing that you really want to work on, but like you can't work on it yet, and then like you get assigned to it and you're like, yes. Uh, but yeah, actually making like an impact to the business, I would say. And then anytime when it's like I get to design something that has no like precedent or has no like anything I have to stay consistent with. I mean, you always have to stay consistent with the style guide in terms of like the font type and like the colors and stuff. But there's sometimes when you get to really be creative, and that's always fun.
Creative. Yeah. So it does inspire or motivates you when you get to actually have that freedom to be able to use your creativity and do something different, have that freedom to be able to create something totally new. And for me, it hits home because working for the federal government, there is so much restriction where we can't just go all crazy, but it does always keep us on our toes in terms of having to redesign some of the forms that are internally being used. It gives you a sense of purpose to say, okay, whatever I'm doing is actually going to serve the public. Have you had any project where you worked on and you're like, whoa, this is great. I'm making an impact. I'm also really enjoying the work that I'm doing. Any project that you thought was one of the best projects that you've worked on?
So the last company I worked with, they were a stock photo company that was determined to make the stock photo industry a more like inclusive, realistic place. So, what stock photos are and stock content, stock video, whatever it is what advertisers, movies, websites, social media, the content that they use, they generally not taking their own photos, taking their own videos to like create an advertisement, to create a billboard, to create a social media ad, to create like whatever it is. They're typically using stock content. So, and there's a number of stock sites that they can choose from to use this. But what my last company, 20, which was a mobile app, and it was cool because it was like anyone who could download this app and take photos and immediately upload your photos to the stock site and list them for sale. So it was cool because like you could make a little bit of money taking your own photos, but what was really cool was that these photos were of real people, what they actually look like on a day-to-day basis. And then the stock website is filled with photos of real looking people, diverse looking people of all shapes and sizes and ages, people with disabilities, people like, like just like really representing what people look like. And that was our whole thing, was people. We also had a lot of like nature content and stuff, but what differentiated our content was like, oh, these people look like everyday people. And it was just a great mission, because it was like, wow, this is such a problem. Like like people not being able to see people who look like them in the world, just like generally on TV, on social media, on whatever, is such a problem that we have today. And it's like for some reason, like stock content is for so many years been so homogeneous, and like it's just like that's just not what the world looks like. And also it was better for the business, because businesses wanted content that is like, hey, we want content that like is diverse, that represents young millennials, that Gen Z, that people with colored hair, people like, we want people like that. But all of these stock videos are like this blonde cheesy, like, you ever look up happy family and like Google that and like see like what the families look like? Like that's not what real families look like.
Yeah.
Businesses are like, no, we want photos that look real, because that's better for our consumer. Our consumer is going to relate to that, and that's going to make them happy and make them more likely to purchase whatever or engage with us or do whatever it is. So it was just like such a good idea and such a like important thing that like stemmed from it was just crazy how like something as simple as like stock photos can like actually make an impact. But so I really liked working there, and we would set up these photo challenges for people to encourage people to take certain types of photos. And I was able to like set those. That was, again, it was a small company, so I wore a lot of hats. So I was in charge of photo challenges too. And I would set things and be like, like one of the photo challenges was like young at heart. So it was like, okay, I want photos of people who are older doing things that young people do. It is so hard to find a stock photo of an older person working out.
Doing. Yeah.
What if we need that? What if that's their whole business model? So like, yeah, like something that's really hard to find is like, there's a lot, but like really specific things like, yeah, like older people showing skin. You don't see that. Larger people showing skin, like, groups of men is really hard to find. You'll find photos of like one man or men and women, but groups of just men, really hard to find. So like, and it's just like this, but like this is how the world operates, and we don't have representation for that. So
Yeah.
that was definitely the most like impactful, like just product overall that I worked on.
Yeah. No, I totally sense some sort of enthusiasm in your voice when you talk about inclusive and diversity, and the fact that you try to work on that. At the same time, going back, well, the platform is Tech Divercity. The name itself is Tech Divercity. What are your thoughts in terms of how diverse you think the tech industry is, and what do you think can be done about that?
Yeah, I would say it's not diverse enough, especially so most of the jobs that I've had, this is actually the first job I've had that I feel like I work with other women. Most of the jobs I've had, I've not only been the youngest, but the only girl in most of the teams that I worked. Like for years, I was the only girl at my company. So yeah, that's definitely a problem, the gender. And then in terms of, it was something that, so the last company I worked at, again, because they're smaller, I was more involved with this type of stuff. The smaller company I worked at last time, or my last company, like I was participating in interviewing people, and something we would talk about all the time was, I, I was also the only minority. I'm technically Latino, so I know I don't look like a minority. I am. Um, and they would constantly talk about, they would at least try to interview people that like an equal, like in terms of gender, in terms of like race, and like just to at least give everyone an equal shot and interview. And they talked about it all the time, but it's hard because people also don't apply to the jobs is the other thing, is like people aren't like aware of, I don't know, like there's just certain the Asian population is also really big in tech, but for some reason there's just gaps. Like I don't know if like women just like don't see themselves in tech, or what it is, or other minorities. There's not a big Latino population either, and I don't see a ton of, you know, the Black population either. Like I do feel like tech is very, like the tech industries are very progressive and are trying to like be better about it. But I feel like you need, it's just hard to like recruit these people when they're not applying to the job, or they don't see themselves in this industry. And it's so chicken and egg, because it's like, well, do they not see themselves in this industry because they know the reputation of this industry and they're like afraid to work, you know, like, or is it, you know, does it go to like is it a deeper problem of just like, I think, you know, because tech is a kind of a newer industry. Again, UX didn't exist when I was a kid. Like because people in positions of privilege are more likely to just like know about these jobs, are more likely to, you know, again, most people, when they think of tech, they think of coders, and it's like, no, that's not what it is.
Not all. Yeah.
The people who know that, I feel like are just often more privileged. I'm not really sure what the problem is.
Yeah.
Or how to fix it, but you're addressing it.
No, I totally, and I can relate to what you just said. Even for me, it was very intimidating to come into the tech industry as a Black woman, as a first generation college graduate. There's just so many barriers that I had to break, and then having to shift my entire career to say, hey, I'm going to do tech. It's absolutely intimidating. So no, I can relate as to why minority women are kind of facing that barrier to come into the tech industry. And we're trying to let them know, hey, there is an opportunity. It's there. You just need to go ahead and grab it. Nobody's actually blocking you from getting that opportunity. If anything, you just need to go and grab that opportunity. So fear of not being able to fit in, thinking that the tech industry is for mostly men, and then having to be a woman. And there's just a lot of barriers that you have to break to convince yourself to say, I fit in. I think that's the biggest challenge that we see when it comes to diversity in tech. But final question for you, Jackie. If there is anyone watching this video that wants to break into the tech industry, what advice do you have for them?
wrote things down. Okay. So, we went over networking. So one of the things is imposter syndrome is so normal and it's never going to go away. I had imposter syndrome with this when Sammy reached out to me. She was like, I can't wait to like hear about your success. And I was like, am I successful? Like imposter syndrome is so normal. It's something that you learn to live with. It's not something you're ever going to like really overcome. And just know that, just remind yourself, this is normal. I am worth it. I am smart. I know what I'm talking about. I have experience in this. If you don't have experience, I'm getting experience in this, and I'm, smart enough to figure it out, and I'm smart enough to be able to do this and to be taken seriously. I deserve to be taken seriously, and just always reminding yourself of that is so important. Another one is work smarter, not harder. But yeah, just work smarter. The work your ass off for 2 years in tech and then coast. Or if you want to continue to be a manager, work at that too. But you don't have to. Also, there's a ton of jobs in tech that prioritize work-life balance. Work at those places. They're not, you know what I mean? Check Glassdoor for reviews. Weed out the places that are going to work you to death and not be fulfilling and make your life miserable. Weed those places out and from the get-go. Work smarter, not harder. You're still getting the same experience, the same salary, the same whatever. There's no need to work at the worst company that works people to death. There's no, working, more than 40 hours a week is not a flex. Not a flex. Take care of yourself, take care of your mental health, take care of your marriage, your kids. That's important. You do that by working smart. Always be looking for jobs. So this is another thing. I was like, I'm just going to get a job at a fun tech company, because I knew about fun tech companies because I had already had that internship, and be a UX designer and be done. And I just want this salary, and then I'll be happy with that. No. And then I'll be promoted internally. No. You want to get new jobs. The more you move around, the more money you're going to make.
Yeah.
The amount of money that you get promoted for is going to be 10 grand, maybe at most. I mean, annually it's 3% or whatever. But when you get a new job, that's when you get a $40,000 increase. That's when you get the big steps, and the days of oh no, you need to show loyalty to a company and be there for 10 years, or you're not, it's going to look bad on your resume. Those days are over. Just because that's just old timey thinking, and it's also probably just a lie that they told you so that they wouldn't leave. People wouldn't leave. But also in tech, layoffs are so common, contracting is so common, working at startups is so common, that seeing your job change on your resume a lot there's so many reasons that people would be looking at your resume and seeing a lot of jobs in a short period of time. It's not going to read as someone who is so disloyal they can't stay at a company. It's no, tech has layoffs all the time, but the kind of nice thing about the layoffs is it kicks your ass a little bit to be okay, time to go into job searching mode again, and then you get that huge raise. So always be looking. Keep your portfolio updated, because if a job comes along and it's oh my gosh, I'm qualified for this, and it's a $30,000-$40,000 raise from what I have, crap, I don't have my portfolio ready. Now I have to get it ready to apply to this job. And sometimes people will reach out to you directly, you're not even looking, and they're hey, are you interested in the job, salary range? Especially now, because in California and New York, they have laws that you have to list the salary. So any job that is hiring in California and New York, which is now anywhere, pretty much every job in the country because everything is remote, they have to list the salary range. So you'll know right away
what you'll be making.
Yeah. And always look at Glassdoor too. Glassdoor is a website that people post reviews for jobs, so you can see what it's like to work there, and they'll be real with you. Your job doesn't need to be your passion. I think having a job that is a good fit for you is really important. Again, you don't want to do UX if you don't like design. Find another job in tech, but it doesn't have to be your passion. what I love so much about my job is that it allows me the work-life balance to pursue my passions.
Yeah.
You know, but it's a good fit for me, and I'm not miserable every single day. I'm not miserable when I have work, because it's still like, oh, this is very complimentary to my brain. I know what I'm doing. I feel good about this. Like, it's still a good fit, but it doesn't have to be your passion. And I think that's just something that a lot of people, and like someone who lived in LA where like a lot of people move to pursue their passions as their job, let me tell you, that life is not, it doesn't always work out. It's a lot of times when you make your job your passion, it's like, it just stops becoming your passion because it now becomes work.